Hello, and welcome to the Pragmatic Product Chat series, where we tackle the biggest challenges facing today's product management, product marketing, and other market and data-driven professionals with some of the best minds in the industry. I'm Paul Young, instructor at Pragmatic Institute, and your host for today's episode. The Pragmatic Instructor team, we meet every week to have discussions about what we're seeing in the industry and the implications out there in the market. And so to help for today's discussion, I'm joined by a few excellent minds from our instructor team. Those include Steve Gaylor, Cindy Cruzado, Amy Graham, and Will Scott. Let's start off by doing a quick round of introductions. So those of you that aren't watching on the YouTube channel can put some voices to names and faces. I'll kick off. My name again is Paul Young. I've been an instructor with Pragmatic for about 12 years. And prior to that, I was a product management and marketing executive at companies like Cisco and Dell, and also a bunch of startups here in Austin, Texas. That's where I live. Let me hand off to you next, Cindy.
Hi, everyone. I joined Pragmatic about 5 years ago. And before that, have been based here in Washington, D.C. and worked in education, weather, meteorology, financial institutions. When we think about payments and processing, as well as CRM solutions, and have for my entire career been very blessed with being in the product management and product marketing world. So great to be here.
All right, Amy.
Hi, all. Amy Graham. And Cindy, you've been here for 6.5 years.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
I'm rounding.
Yeah. So I joined Pragmatic 6.5 years ago, just a couple months before Cindy did. I'm based out of Denver, Colorado. I've got a background in operations, managing software development teams, product teams, software services, and super excited to be here today.
All right, let's go next to Will Scott.
Hi, everyone. My name is Will Scott. It's a pleasure to be here today. I am Pragmatic's newest instructor, so I'm very privileged to join this group of veterans around me here. My background is in B2B product marketing and management, 25 years experience, big companies, small companies, hardware, software, services, and SaaS as an individual contributor, a leader, and as a consultant as well. But it's a great pleasure to be here today.
All right, thanks, Will. And lastly, Steve Gaylor.
Hi, Steve Gaylor here, joining from southeastern Oklahoma. I have been an instructor at Pragmatic for almost 10 years now. It'll be 10 years here in a couple months. And also spent about 25 years in industry with all kinds of different technology companies, hardware, software, services, software as a service, combination of all those things, and several different leadership roles, product management, product marketing, operations, account management, and different roles like that. So excited to be here with everybody else. I love these discussions where we can get into our interesting debate. And I'm kind of keeping an eye on the clock to see how long it takes somebody to speak up and say, what problem are you trying to solve? Because we'll definitely get to that point, I have a feeling.
Yeah, we're going to start a timer. I'm guessing it's not going to be too long. All right, so we got a bunch of really good brains here with a lot of variety of experiences. Today, what we're talking about is how do we put everything that we teach here at Pragmatic into practice, right? It's one thing to talk about it, but it's another thing to do it. And all of us on today's discussion have had those experiences, some good and some maybe not so good, of implementing, and creating that market-driven culture, using all the tools and techniques that we teach on the framework. But how do you actually implement this stuff? For those of you that are listening, how do you create a market-driven culture? How do you bring those skills to life that we teach in our sessions? That can be really tricky because change is never easy, right? And it involves, some discomfort. And so I wanted to start off with Amy, because I know this is a passion area for you. When you think about implementing some of the work that we talk about in what we teach, what are some of the big barriers, the big challenges that you've seen in bringing this work to life?
How much time do we have? Gosh, where do I start? I guess if I were to narrow it down, there's probably some top things that come to mind immediately. One is not having leadership support. So we often get folks who come through training, or like, for example, if I were to come to training and then if I go back to my organization and I don't have support from the top down, that can be a huge barrier. So not having leadership or executive support to empower product professionals to actually implement what we are now teaching them, I think that's a big one. I also think a huge barrier is getting overwhelmed. This framework is phenomenal. It's fantastic. It's job changing, life changing, product changing. It can change organizations, but it can also be really overwhelming in terms of where do we start. And then I'd probably say, not having, honestly, I don't know how to say this, but not having the discipline to just do the right thing and stick to it, because it's easier to just look away and move quick. So those are my top three.
The fires are always there, right? They're always burning.
That's
and it's very tempting to go back to those.
Yep. And if you're a professional firefighter and you're good at it, that's just what you're going to keep doing.
Well, and many organizations reward that, right? They reward the firefighter because, like, oh, look, here comes Will. He swung in at the 11th hour to help sales close that deal. And isn't he a hero? And like, one of the things that I always like to share with teams whenever I'm leading them is that if the culture of the organization rewards the firefighter, it creates arsonists. People who learn that the way to get stuff done is to set fires, because that's how we get stuff and resources. So, anyways, good insight, Steve. I'm sorry, Cindy. Go for it.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest barriers to somebody individually looking at how do I change what I do, is roles and responsibilities. Feeling like these activities are great, but what am I expected to do? There's more there I think I should be doing. And there are some classic roles and responsibilities, things that organizations run up to as they're evolving their development methodology. It's product owner, business analyst, product manager, who does what in that kind of mix. But as product marketing develops and gets strength, it's product manager versus product marketer. How is that work divided? What do we do together? And when there's any gray area in that, it just makes everything else that's challenging just even more challenging to navigate.
Yeah.
So roles are a challenge. Top down leadership is a challenge. The status quo, managing that is a challenge.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, Will, did y'all have anything to add to that? I mean, we're just getting started on this.
I think, we could spend a long time on this question, as Amy said. I think I would like to echo a couple of things that Amy said. I was a part of a number of Nahito visits that we did with clients of ours, 2, 3, well, they're ongoing really. And the number one trend that we found among organizations who successfully implemented and who really brought the change to a market-driven culture was support from the top down. Without a doubt, anyone who was successful had support from the top down. And we spent, a fair amount of time with companies who were less successful, and those that had a lack of success. Oftentimes, either senior management wasn't supportive or they weren't bought in, one or the other. Right? Each of those creating different degrees of issue as you go through the process. So I think that's a big thing. The other comment I would make, you're talking about firefighters. If you look at those activities on the framework, and we talk about the right-hand side being execution-oriented, and you get over there in that very last column where we're supporting the rest of the organization, and that's where the fires are burning the hottest, right? If you think about those execution-oriented activities, you have a lot more clarity around that, right? If you did something right or wrong. You get the pat on the back. You get the the invite to the sales retreat because you were the sales support MVP kind of thing, even though you were in product. And so instant gratification and instantly knowing or short-term knowing whether you did well or not. That stuff on the upper left-hand side, the strategic stuff, which is really where the market-driven approach begins, that stuff's a lot scarier, right? You don't know if you were right or wrong for a year, 2 years, 3 years. The reward payback on that, by the time you've done well in a given product area, you may already be off to another product before you even know if you made the right decisions. And so I think that's a part of this gravitation as well, is that instant gratification, that short-term feedback loop makes it easier to focus on now and easier to deal with the fires and easier for them to be a priority. When reality is, if you spend time on the strategic activities and do them right, all that stuff on the right-hand side is easier. You don't have as many fires.
I like that, Steve. We're always looking for that dopamine hit, aren't we? That's what we do with those.
It's the truth. Yeah.
Nothing like being celebrated for being the hero. Paul, when I think about this, I try and think more. I think change in an organization is absolutely, difficulty of changing the organization is not limited to product management or marketing. It's just hard to do. And I try and think, well, why is change hard? And this is sort of my reflection on it, is change is scary to people because it's unknowns. They don't know what the future is going to ask them. And it might force them to redefine themselves in terms of what they're doing today. And they may not make it in the future. So whenever anyone comes to me and proposes change, like, oh, hang on a minute, till I know what I'm getting myself into, I'm going to not sort of, indulge myself in that. I think the challenge of change is particularly painful in product management because the number of organizations that product management interacts with. I think if you were to change the, book closing process in the finance department down the barrel somewhere, that will be relatively straightforward because it probably doesn't touch many people. But think about product management, right? We're touching engineering, we're touching marketing, we're touching sales, we're touching support, we're touching services, we're touching the exec. So it's not just us changing, it truly is an organizational change. And I suspect that's why it's probably front and center for us when we look at that organizational change. It's not just changing how you close the books at the end of the quarter, it's changing how you think about your core business, which is your products. For what it's worth, that's my perspective.
No, I think we're getting onto something. I sometimes describe the firefighting aspect on the right that you were talking about, Steve, as a sugar rush, because you get that immediate hit that Will was talking about, the dopamine. Whereas the stuff on the left, it's a bit more of a delayed gratification.
Yeah.
If you do Nihito, right, nothing important happens in the office. If you do your market research and so on, it may be quarters, maybe even year or more before you see the outcome of that in a product or a feature that you launch. And with short-term thinking, let's be realistic, a lot of executives are driven by that. A lot of teams are driven by that. Then sometimes it just doesn't happen. But one of the things we all kind of hit was the importance of top-down drive for this. To make change happen, you want to make the team smarter. You want to train them. You want to get them using the tools that we teach, thinking in a more market-driven way. But we also want to push top-down where the executive team is saying, yes, we want to move in this direction. So because we all kind of touch that as important, I wanted to drill down on that a little bit and ask y'all, every one of us around this table has been in that seat of having to talk to our peers at the executive level, or perhaps as an individual contributor where you were trying to get buy-in from those above you. How do you create that top-down change? How do you create that momentum from the executive team level to move this forward?
You just said it, Paul. You talked about getting buy-in. I mean, I'll tell you, I probably spent the first 6 months post pragmatic training just socializing. What is the philosophy? What is pragmatic? What does it mean to be outside in? I created like a 5-slide PowerPoint presentation, went to account management, went to sales, went to operations, went to all the different functional areas inside of the organization, just sort of introducing, here's this philosophy, here's what it means, but then also spinning it to like, here's the value you'll get if we make this change and if we start operating in this manner. Like, here's why it matters to you, sales. And I tried really, 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 really hard to build champions in each individual functional area so that then I could take those champions and they could help me actually champion pragmatic and start to execute. And then as soon as you have that buy-in, you've got that, and it may take time, like I said, but when you have that, it makes the whole execution and the implementation of it way easier.
Yeah, I have, a great point, Amy. And I have seen countless examples of students kind of describing what you just said. And in practical terms, kind of putting a little bit of proof behind that, this is the value I'm going to deliver you, developers, you, sales and marketing, by aligning the different activities in the framework as inputs to the process everybody's working through across the organization. And you just you take the statements you're making and you actually show them how it was going to work, and you build not only the desire for it to happen, but you build the collaboration to go make it
Yeah.
work. Putting positioning as one of those inputs at the very early stages of developing out a new release and showing them how what you're going to do is going to help them in terms of a process, I think makes it real.
Exactly.
I think that's spot on. I think when I think of executive buy-in, that can mean a lot of things, right? For me, if you're trying to lead a change initiative, executive buy-in is important, but that means you have executive support. It doesn't mean you have the executive stick, right? Because if you think buy-in is just being threats from the SVP, the famous phrase, culture eats strategy for lunch. You're going to find people finding all the reasons why it's not going to work. So it's not about I'm reminded of that famous Aesop's fable where the sun and the wind have a bet about who can get the shepherd to take off his cloak, and the wind blows harder and harder and harder, and the harder the wind blows, the more the guy grabs the cloak around his neck, but the sun shines and then the coat comes off. And so I think so is true with change. It's not about fear and threats and the stick. It's got to be about your life's going to be better and it's good for us. That's my sense anyway.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to listen as each of you have gone. There's really two facets of that buy-in that you've talked about there. You talk about executive buy-in, and we all talked about how critical that was. Then you also just talked about buy-in from the rest of the organization as well. So there's two parts of that, and I think to each of those, there's a couple of different stages. One of them, which Amy kind of alluded to, was awareness. What is this market-driven thing? What are we talking about? What is this framework really all about? What do you mean when you say outside in, kind of thing versus inside out? And so there's that awareness at the executive level and the awareness across the organization. And then the second part of that is what's in it for me. And the things that are in it for the executive team, you're talking about faster time to market, higher margins, higher customer satisfaction, better product market fit, all those kinds of things. But then on the flip side of that coin, which is some of the, kind of what Cindy alluded to, is development. You're going to have better requirements. You have a better understanding of what we're trying to do in the market. We're not going to tell you how. We're going to tell you what needs to happen. What are the problems we're trying to solve? Marketing, we're going to give you an understanding of the people who are influencing the buying process, the buying journey they go through. What are the things they need as a part of that? So when you get ready to develop messages and messaging, and you're thinking about channels to use to get that information into the market, so everybody's talked about, to me, awareness and buy-in being related to what's in it for me, but the what's in it for me for the executive team is very different to the what's in it for me for the individual parts of the company that are we're also going to have to get support from.
Yeah, there's another part of this that I think is important as a message for product teams, and that is that we often think about the organizational process, the transformation, in the jobs and what we're doing in our projects, but there's a huge role as an individual you can make, and giving your organization following training an example of what being messenger of the market is actually. Be the one asking about the market, be the one bringing data to the table, be the one that is kind of personifying what we would like everybody to do, so that executives can use that as a spotlight and point to that as modeling behavior for everybody. I think that we have a lot of power as individuals.
Yes.
Absolutely. All right, so I want to hit y'all with a specific, perhaps a specific use case here. We talked about getting that top-down buy-in, but I think maybe 20 years ago in my career, I was recruited into a startup here in Austin, kind of a late-stage startup, maybe 50 to 100 employees. The founder was still highly engaged, and I was brought in to build product management for the first time. And up until that point, it was the founder and the engineers. And you know how this story goes, right? The founder would go directly to the engineers and say, build this feature, and they would build it. And basically, the roadmap and product development was driven out of the founder's head. The whim of the day. This founder was very into F1 racing, for example. And so you started to see like racing analogies showing up in the user interface. you'd see like a little steering wheel and then dashboard and stuff like that, because like that's what was on his mind. And so when they brought me in, it was like the first time to kind of bring in that market-driven culture. And this, let's just say the founder was not really bought into that. He was kind of forced into that by his board. So I mean, I'm happy to share how I dealt with it, but I'm curious if y'all or anybody listening to this is facing a situation like that, where you have an executive, perhaps that executive is not bought into this idea of outside in. Maybe they've got a lot of great ideas. Sometimes you see like a CTO or a founder falling into this. How would you?
I think
How would you deal with that?
I have a stab at this, Paul, because I'm so struck by how we can apply the very tenets and principles of Pragmatic to this problem, right? That reluctant exec would be in our language a potential, someone who isn't shopping, but we think they have a problem. I think if you think about changing the way an organization thinks about product management as a product, meaning you're replacing something old with something new, that everything we learn in Pragmatic can be applied. What's the market problems we're solving? What are those problem-oriented capabilities? What are the features? What are the user personas, the buyer personas? How do we talk about the value of what we're doing? Almost everything applies. When we get down to profitability, that probably doesn't apply. But all the tenets and disciplines, if we think of it as a product, then how do you model that reluctant buyer? That's a buyer persona right there, right? So how do we break down that buyer persona? What does he or she care about? What it keeps them up? How are they measured? All those things, I think, is maybe one way of approaching it. To eat our own dog food, as it were.
I like it, Will.
I think, Will, sometimes I phrase that as a recognition that the first market we have to sell to is our executive team. As soon as you realize that's your first market, then things it gives you a little bit different perspective. I also, Paul, I think there's a couple of things that cause that scenario that you're talking about, where you've got an executive that's got all the great ideas and says, here, go do this. One is, I think oftentimes, especially in those startups, those people in many cases came from industry. They recognized a problem that existed. There wasn't a solution. And their entrepreneurial spirit said, okay, well, I'll go create a company to solve that problem. And they see a lot of success and they say, okay, wow, that worked out. Let's see what other big ideas I have, right? And so I think, so that's one scenario that causes that to occur. I think another scenario, honestly, that causes that to occur is because either the product team doesn't exist or the product team themselves are not coming up with those needs from the market, from those. So, if you're not bringing me anything, we're going to move forward. We're going to do something, right? We're going to go create something. We're going to go build. And if you're not giving me problems to solve, here's some problems to go solve, right? So I think those two scenarios are probably what I've seen most often cause that situation. In both of those, I think the answer is when you get those inputs or you get those strong suggestions all the way up to mandate, if you can put yourself in a position where you say, that's a really good idea, but give me a week to go validate that with the market, or let me go get some market feedback. The only way I have ever been successful at combating, I guess, for lack of a more polite term, combating that situation is when I can come back with the facts, right? The data from the market. This is what you believe. And I understand the 3 people you went golfing with last weekend thought that was a really good idea. I surveyed 1,000 people in the market, and only the 3 people you went golfing with thought that was a good idea, or that had that problem, right? So in either of those scenarios, in the former, we're offsetting what they're saying, and maybe it is a good idea, right? And we validated it, and we know that that's a good thing in the market. Let's move forward. The other thing, I think, in the second scenario where the product team is not bringing new ideas, new opportunities to the organization, by taking that validation approach, at least we're starting to move toward interacting with the market and uncovering those ideas and uncovering those problems. And so it starts to build that muscle, that discipline of interacting with the market. So, I mean, those are the 2 scenarios I've run into, and that's how I do.
Do you feel this? I was reading an article the other day, and maybe others got perspective on this. Is agile and the whole concept and principles of agile is great for many things, but it might have over-influenced product management because there's almost a value placed today on speed.
Yes.
Look, we don't do all that research. Hey, Steve, all that stuff you're talking about, validation, that all sounds like bureaucracy. That all sounds like busy work.
Yeah.
Agile teaches us just throw it against the wall, see if it sticks. And
Yeah.
I feel like we've almost encroached too much on the discipline. What do you think?
Yeah, so that's a great example, Will. So a couple of things come to mind when you mention that. There's that big, at one point in time, and I don't hear it quite as much as I do now, but there was kind of a wave there for a period of time that was fail fast, fail often. And anytime a student brought that up in class, I said, well, what if we don't fail at all? Wouldn't that be a better outcome?
Even better.
Right? Yeah. And then there's that concept of, I actually got in a debate with a student one time, and he was talking about, the exact scenario. Let's just put something out there, see what happens, and see how it goes. And I said, okay, well, I'll tell you what, let's do. Let's approach some of our wealthy friends, and you get them to give you $1 million, and I'll get one of my wealthy friends to give me $1 million. You start building stuff, and I'll start doing some market research. And let's see which one of us runs out of money first. And he finally, he said, okay, because if he miss it, his million's gone. I can go spend, $20,000, get us some insight from the market, and still have $950,000 or $980,000 to go build something. And so when he started, you could almost see him slump over when I said that. It was funny when we got to that. But I do think, I don't know what others think, but I think that is definitely something that we are sometimes fighting against with this market-driven culture, is this impression.
Courses for courses, right? You don't want Boeing to fail fast, fail often, right?
No, in a mature market, we don't do that, right? It's safety first for Boeing, right? But what you guys are mentioning, the real reality for so many teams is that they're being pushed to move faster. They're working in 2-week increments. It's hard to think about vision and how you're connected. But that's one thing that individuals and teams can do. In addition, as Steve, you're talking about, make time for giving me the ability to go collect some data. If we can connect those 2-week sprints to the business goals, if we can be talking about the granular things that we're doing and how they're going to add up and get to those business goals. Well, now we're talking the language of a head of technology, and we're talking the language of somebody in sales. But it really takes us intentionally connecting the dots and thinking about it. And it might be just a couple of additional sentences of context as we're talking about a specific feature, but it means the world to actually accomplish what we're talking about here. It's hard. It is really hard. I think for many teams, they don't feel as comfortable understanding how their work connects to the business goals they're trying to drive. And that might mean we need to pause and seek more answers around how executives see that connection. But it might also be an opportunity to point out where we're disconnected. And that's also a good outcome in that conversation.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to echo everything that all you said, but going back to what Steve was talking about initially, like the 2 reasons potentially why we have that inside out exec, I would add something. Sometimes it's because product doesn't have credibility yet, or people in the organization don't trust the process. I don't think it's any secret that I'm a big process person. So for me, it was like all about getting a process in place for evaluation of new features and new ideas and new possibilities, and getting buy-in and approval and agreement on that process. And then when you do have that executive or somebody who's inside out, you turn them back to the process. Similar to what you all have sort of mentioned, but well, why did you hire me? Why did we put this process in place? Let me go do some data. And you leverage data to have that conversation versus getting into this really potentially emotional or political discussion. And I would always steer people back to the process, hold people accountable to that, start to build that discipline. So I think that's a big piece of it too.
So Amy, to that end, when to kind of like put a bow on the question that started this, I was asking about that, or telling you about that recalcitrant founder that was very inside out. What I ended up doing, kind of a combination of what y'all said, was, basically the next release that we were working on was a lost cause. It's like, I'm not going to turn that around. It's the one after that. And so like, let's let that go. It's too late to affect that anyways. I just said, all right, fine. We'll just manage that through the process and get it built. I'm going to start doing some market research. And both I and my team, we went out and started doing win-loss analysis to find out why we were actually winning and losing, and some just regular Nihito, like unstructured market research. And the person I identified as the linchpin to the transition or the change management process was actually not the founder. It was the VP of engineering. I made him my partner. And when I started to go down and talk to him, I said, look, we've been building features for a long time and we've been moderately successful, but what got us here won't get us to the next level. Don't you want to make sure that your team is not just building stuff, but rather is solving problems that resonate in our market? And that was a pretty quick conversation. He was on board. And once I started to bring that market data to the table, to the executive team, I was able to train the VP of engineering that whenever the founder would come down directly to him to say, go build me this thing, here you go, Steve. He would say, what problem are you trying to solve? And the founder was busy doing founder stuff, running the company. He didn't have the time to go get market research like I did, because that was my job. And so it was always just a matter of like, who's got better data here? And I would always have better data. Now, I don't want to say I won every single battle. Sometimes we would just go build stuff because the founder said so. That's just the reality. But I always wanted to be in a position where I had superior data, and I could speak with that data in my pocket, not the other way around.
Yeah, it's a great example. And you're also showing how to trust the process, to Amy's point. Sorry, Amy.
Paul, can I say something real quick to one of your comments? You said you didn't win everything. Sometimes you went and built stuff because the founder said so, right? But I would argue that if you still bring data to the table, at a bare minimum, we can make a better decision about investment. We can make a better decision about the implementation of something. We're going in eyes open versus not having a clue potentially.
Yes. Oh, and one thing I forgot. We're talking about change management, right? Creating a market-driven culture. Simple things like language changes are totally within the purview of a product manager. Going from feature to problem is an example of that.
Yes.
But I'm sure many of y'all and many of the people listening or watching this in the future have some version of what I call the idea portal or the request portal, where sales can go in and request a feature and so on. And usually they're like, submit an idea, right? Submit a feature you want to. No, what we did was we made a simple change. We called it the problem portal.
Yes.
So now we're just through that simple language change, forcing people to articulate the problem you want us to solve rather than the feature you want us to go build. Mm-hmm. Again, outside in versus inside out, right? And that simple change totally upended the conversation in a positive way. Now everyone is speaking the language of problems, and when language starts, data follows, or it will. And so that was like something that I didn't really recognize the power of. That I think the framework that Pragmatic teaches can help with is just powering the language that drives the change.
May I ask this, Paul? Is there some characters that you're not going to be able to convert? And I'll give you the context of this. Several years ago, I had a consulting engagement to implement a formal product management framework within an organization. And I was not successful in it. It was a short-term engagement. And what killed me was sales. Because sales was used to ruling the roost. Sales was used to saying and bullying the product managers so they could close the deal at the end of the month by getting the product managers to commit something on a roadmap. And I sat down with these sales guys. I said, why are you doing this? I mean, we're more thoughtful about this. In 3 years, it's going to make all the difference. And like they're saying, Will, we think week to week, month to month, quarter to quarter. I'm an enterprise software sales guy. I'm almost certainly not here in 3 years' time. I'm on my next gig. So don't ask me to, and it was a level of honesty I appreciate, but don't ask me to think of long-term impact and technical debt. I don't care about that. My job is to make my number. And there was just incredible cultural pushback. Has anyone else come across that? I didn't have an answer for that, but
yeah.
Oh yeah, I've been in that world, definitely. And you got to show them how they can win, and they've got to. It reminds me of one specific enterprise solution that I was working on. They didn't believe in the product, and so they were looking for gaps in features as a way to kind of make up for their lack of confidence in the value that we were trying to deliver for the price. And so we recognized this as just sales resistance And we really sat down and built out ROI calculators to help them uncover what the value was in the specific enterprise contracts. And it's an example, Paul, of what you were saying, and switching the conversation from feature to problem, from thinking about discounts to talking about value. And we also put in place an intake system which showed the individual reps that their voice was being heard. And we gave them the questions, and the questions again switched from feature to problem. And they started to realize that there was a lot of value in capturing why they were being asked for things and that need. But it took a long time. I don't think I ever call that a successful implementation, but it took a long time trying to win them over by giving them something they could sell with.
Yeah.
Well, oh, sorry, Steve.
I was just going to say, Amy, that, we talked about executive buy-in and senior buy-in and all that kind of stuff. A couple of times I've had to sit down and have a conversation with a CEO or a COO or somebody like that, even a CFO, depending on where product reported, and say, okay, you have a choice in this organization. Do you want to be a sales-driven organization? Do you want to be a technology-driven organization? Do you want to be a customer-led organization? Do you want to be a market-driven organization? And I can give you all kinds of data that says the long-term profitability and expansion of the growth of this company is most likely to occur when you have a market-driven culture. But if you don't want to commit to that, I'm wasting my time.
Yeah.
And
what are we trying to be when we grow up?
That hard conversation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just add one last piece. I have absolutely run into that, Will. I've seen it with clients that we teach to at Pragmatic, and through like reflection and just learning. I think sometimes the makeup or the profile is that it's a client who's like, the company's been really successful, and it's often just based on luck. And so to them, it's like, well, it's been working. If it's working, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So then the approach that I take is, imagine if things are so well now, just imagine what could happen if you started to follow these practices and how much better they could be. Right. So it's not about you're broken, you need to do something wrong, or you're doing something wrong and we need to do it, differently and fix this. It's like, what could we take that's working now and make it even better, but follow these principles to set us up for longer term success.
At the same time, I don't want to be Pollyannish here. Being market driven is not for everybody, and so I would suggest that any product leader or product manager or product marketer who listens to this, there are certain preconditions that are almost like an internal scorecard in your head that you have to think about if you're going into a new job to say, like, is this company an appropriate candidate to be market driven? I think most are, but not all. Like, for example, I think some of you alluded to this, but if you're like I worked with a company once that was a really big name that everyone would recognize, large scale enterprise consulting. Body shop, right? Where they just threw brains on a stick at clients every week. And every engagement was custom. And that's how they liked it. And so for them, they're, by definition of that business model, going to be more customer driven because every deal is negotiated. Every deal is a little bit different. I mean, you could certainly productize some of that stuff, but doing full scale what we teach as market driven might not actually be appropriate there, and that's okay. And so the question that I think Amy or Will or Cindy was saying about, like, what do we want to be when we grow up? I think it's a pretty relevant question when evaluating how to make change happen and the scope and scale of that change.
Yeah, I absolutely. And I think one more thing, what I kind of thought of as Amy was providing her feedback. Sometimes the question you have to ask is, things are going well, we're doing good. As Amy said, imagine how much better it could be if we were in this market-driven approach. Another one that I use sometimes to bring that dose of reality, Amy, was, what are you going to do if one of your competitors emerges using this market-driven approach?
Yeah.
Right? If you're not already thinking about it, and you have to make that U-turn in a very brief amount. Look at disruptors. 99% of disruptors find a new and better way to solve an existing problem. It's not about it's not about uncovering new problems, right? They found new problems in the market or new ways to address those existing problems. And, if you're in that position, you have to react. It's a hard thing to go do.
Great point, Steve.
All right, I want to wrap up with two final questions. So the first is, we talked a lot about creating the top-down buy-in, what that looks like, how to get there, some different techniques. A lot of the people that are going to be listening to this aren't in a position to like directly affect that because they're not leaders. They're individual contributors. So if you put on your individual contributor hat for a moment and say, like, you're a product manager, you're in an organization, you've just gone through like a training like what we offer, you're bought in to the idea of being market driven, but perhaps organizationally you're not there. You're still firefighting, you're still building the idea of the day, and so on. And you might look at some of the stuff we've talked about today and say, well, I could never do that. Like the purview of my role, the scope of my role doesn't allow for that, to create that change. What can you do as an individual contributor to drive meaningful change towards that market-driven space?
I think, I'll take a stab at that one first, Paul. I think you hit on it earlier when you said you were in that role and you gave up on the current release and you said, okay, I'm going to work on the next one. What you can do as an individual contributor is carve out a small unit of work, a pocket of work, a release, or maybe if you can work in even half a release that's market focused rather than the adding feature focused kind of stuff. Start to carve out those places and start small and build those successes. I mean, it's probably part of my mentality, but one of my favorite things was to be able to say, I told you so, right? To be able to bring those proof points back, right? Okay, yeah. You're not totally bought in. Let me show you. Let me demonstrate. And as an individual contributor, if I'm an individual contributor in product, I can still have a lot of impact just from my position in the organization. So how do I carve out a little pocket to be successful? Maybe it's just something as simple as, I don't need anybody else's help to go write positioning documents for my products. And let me feed those positioning documents to the rest of the organization, and they can then see how it helps them. And I start to get their buy-in, right? Things like that, I think, is don't underestimate your power. I think Will said this earlier. Don't underestimate your power as an individual contributor because of your location in the organization within product. You still touch and impact a lot of people.
A forest fire starts with one spark, right?
Steve, I was going to say the same thing. I tell my classes that, like, you don't need permission to go perform positioning. Do it. There's some low-hanging fruit that we can just start to knock off. And if it works, then people are like, what are you doing? I want, tell me about that. Let's see more of it. I also would throw something else out there, Paul. I think, and maybe this is a skill, but I think that you have to, as they say, manage through influence versus authority. So we have to infiltrate through influence, being super influential, and again, telling that story and getting that buy-in and building champions, right? And so I think that's part of this story as well in terms of an individual contributor. I also 100% believe that thoughts become outcomes. And if you're saying, I could never do that, that will never happen, it's not possible, you've already defeated yourself. So, that's contradicting what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
We haven't touched a lot on it as an individual, what you need to do to go gather data, but I think that is underlining everything you guys are saying. Don't wait for somebody to tell you need to do 12 interviews in a quarter. Go out and do one, and then do another, and look at your usage data, and just allocate time, buy back time to do it. That knowledge builds context over time, and you will find yourself more quickly than you could ever imagine being in the position to be in those conversations and bring a little bit of influence to the table.
And confidence.
That's confidence. Spot on. I'd encourage people, there's a formalized change model I've been a big fan of for many years called the Kotter 8-step change model by a guy called John Kotter with a K out of Harvard. But essentially the gist is this, like Steve said, start small. If you try and boil the ocean, you're surely going to sail. So something small, compact, self-contained, and then develop a team of allies, of comrades. So if you're going to work with someone in sales or wherever it might be, a small team of like-minded people. Then find your Patreon. Then find your executive sponsor, not the guy or girl with a stick, but someone who's going to say, I support what's going on here. And then I think the key thing, I think everyone said here, is find those short-term wins and celebrate them and market the hell out of them.
Yes.
Internally, I mean, market the hell out of them. Because once people start seeing the success you're having, the insights you're getting, I love the win-loss interview. It's a great place to start, right? Then you can start expanding beyond that. But I think the key thing is start small, get your team of collaborators, find your sponsor, celebrate those short-term wins, and repeat.
Excellent. So let's finish up on a kind of a rapid fire round. If you could think of like 1, 2, or 3 things that somebody listening to this needs to go do immediately if they're interested in creating market-driven change within their organization. We've talked about a whole basket full of stuff today, but what would be the top things on your mind that somebody listening needs to go do if they're trying to create change within their organization?
I always felt, and it's interesting, I had a model that I always used myself, more of a way to think about it. As we've had our discussion here today, so many of the things that we've talked about fall into these 3 categories, which I always thought was really important. I used to talk about the 3 C's of change. What does it require in order to drive this kind of market-driven change? Number 1, C, commitment. Number 2, collaborate. And number 3, communicate. And those were the 3 C's. So if you can get the commitment, understand you've got to collaborate with the rest of the organization, and then communicate the why and the how and the success. I mean, I think you're going to be a long way towards being able to implement this kind of approach.
I don't have any fancy method, Paul. I echo what Steve just said entirely, for sure. I think it comes back to something you said, which is leveraging the pragmatic framework as our language, to just start socializing that and have it just be part of our vocabulary. And it will, if we're disciplined to it, which goes to Steve's point about commitment, if we're committed and we're disciplined to it, that's going to go a long way in terms of our ability to shift our mindset.
I think for me, the first question is you have to ask yourself is, do I want to be a firefighter or a change leader? There's nothing wrong with being a firefighter, right? But that may be not what's going to keep you going in the long term. And if you want to be a change leader, for me, it's look for someone else in the organization who you've seen lead change and sort of get that mentorship. Because navigating corporate politics is an incredibly difficult thing to do. So it can be quite lonely as well. So, it's all about if you can get those collaborators, I think that's your first step on the journey of change.
I would say 2 things that, build off of what everybody's saying, frankly, but building relationships inside the organization, have them know you, get to know them, their mandates, how they're measured, really start to build an understanding of where you're jointly aligned, where you can potentially help them. But with those relationships, you're then going to be able to be the second point here, which is be that driver of talking about value. We tend to talk about all the bits and pieces and the how we do it, but be that one that stands out, talking about the value of what we're doing. And I think that's a bridge to those relationships that you're building. Those are key to being able to do anything in the framework and doing it well.
That's great. And I'll add my final thought, which is go get the data. Everything we've talked about is underpinned by that, right? And I think Amy made a great point on that earlier about you don't need anyone's permission to go get the data. And the good news about now in this remote virtual world that we're all in now, the barrier to going to get it is so much lower. You can get quantitative data very quickly with tools like SurveyMonkey and Pendo and so on. You can get qualitative data more inexpensively than ever before with tools like Zoom. You don't necessarily have to go fly to meet somebody. If you're at the table with that executive or whoever you're trying to talk to, and you can pull data out of your pocket and speak from a position of data, you're talking from a position of power. Now you have to frame that correctly. Like Steve was talking about earlier, I told you so, has to be delivered in the right way. I refer to that sometimes as speaking their love language. Everyone has a different love language, right? You have to understand for the person you're talking to what's theirs. But if you have the data, you're in a much more solid place.
Yeah. And for full disclosure, Paul, there was a sentence that came before I told you so. And that is, this paycheck every couple of weeks is working out really well, but I told you so.
Would like to keep that coming, right?
Yep.
All right. I think that's a good place to wrap it up. So that does it for today's episode, everybody. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to join us next week when we tackle another great topic designed to help you elevate your product, your company, and your career. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, you all.